In December 1916, a group of Russian aristocrats fed a man enough cyanide to kill 5 people. He kept talking, so they shot him in the chest. He got up, they shot him again and again, beat him, wrapped him in a carpet, and threw him into a frozen river. That man was a barely literate peasant from the middle of nowhere, Siberia, and by the time he died, he was arguably the most powerful person in the Russian Empire, more feared than generals, more influential than ministers, whispering directly into the ear of the Tsar and Tsarina themselves. So here's the question nobody can quite answer, even a century later. How does a nobody become the puppet master of an empire? Trust me on this one. The answer is way stranger than the legend. Welcome back to Minds of History, the channel where we don't just tell you what happened, we climb inside the heads of the people who made it happen. Today, we're going inside one of the most bizarre minds in modern history, Grigori Rasputin, the mystic, the mad monk, the man they couldn't kill. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because if you like history with the psychology turned all the way up, you're going to feel right at home. All right, let's go to Siberia. Grigori Rasputin was born in 1869 in Pokrovskoye, a village so remote that the middle of nowhere would have been an upgrade. No school worth mentioning, no prospects. His future was written the day he was born. Farm, church, vodka, grave. And for about 30 years, that's exactly what he did. He drank, he stole, he got into fights. The neighbors called him a troublemaker. Honestly, if you'd met young Rasputin, future ruler of Russia would not have been your first guess. Probably not your 1,000th. But then something happened that flipped a switch in his brain, and historians still argue about what it really was. Around age 28, Rasputin had what he described as a religious vision. He dropped everything and became a stranic, a wandering, holy man. And here's the thing you need to understand about Imperial Russia. Wandering mystics were basically celebrities. In a deeply religious empire where most people couldn't read, a man who claimed to speak with God had real currency. And Rasputin? He was a natural. He had this hypnotic stare. Nearly everyone who met him wrote about the eyes. He spoke in riddles that sounded profound. He'd hold eye contact just a little too long, say something eerily personal, and let the silence do the work. You know what's funny? Strip away the beard and the mysticism, and Rasputin was running the same playbook as every modern cold reader and cult leader. Confidence, ambiguity, and unshakable eye contact. He wasn't performing magic. He was performing certainty in a world that was terrified and desperate for it. By 1905, word of the Siberian holy man had traveled all the way to St. Petersburg, and that's where our peasant meets his empire. To understand what happens next, you need to understand one desperate family. Tsar Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra had a secret so dangerous they hid it from the entire country. Their only son, Alexei, the heir to the throne, had hemophilia. His blood couldn't clot, a bruise could kill him. And in the early 1900s, medicine had nothing. Imagine that for a second. You rule 1/6 of the planet's landmass, and you can't stop your own child from bleeding. Enter the peasant with the eyes. In 1907, Alexei had a severe bleeding episode. Doctors were helpless. In desperation, Alexandra called for the mystic everyone was whispering about. Rasputin came, prayed over the boy, and Alexei got better. It happened again, and again. Every time doctors failed, Rasputin seemed to succeed. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Kind of like finding out the magician's trick is somehow more impressive than the magic. Historians have a few theories. One of the leading ones, Rasputin told the family to keep the doctors away, and the doctor's favorite treatment at the time was aspirin, which we now know is a blood thinner, possibly the single worst thing you could give a hemophiliac. So Rasputin may have healed the heir to the Russian throne by accidentally practicing evidence-based medicine. Add in the calming effect he had, lower stress genuinely can reduce bleeding, and you've got a miracle with a perfectly earthly explanation. But here's what matters. Alexandra didn't know that. To her, this man was sent by God to keep her son alive. And from that moment on, Rasputin wasn't just a friend of the family. He was untouchable. And when a man becomes untouchable, he starts touching everything. By the 1910s, Rasputin's life in St. Petersburg was, frankly, unhinged. Wild parties, scandalous affairs, drunken nights that made the tabloids of the day. The church hated him. The nobility despised him. The secret police had a literal file cataloging his escapades. And none of it mattered, because every time a minister complained about Rasputin, Alexandra didn't fire Rasputin. She pushed to fire the minister. Then came the accelerant, World War I. In 1915, Nicholas made possibly the worst decision of his reign. He left to personally command the army at the front, leaving Alexandra effectively running the government back home. And who was standing behind Alexandra? Exactly. Ministers rose and fell based on whether our friend, that's what Alexandra called him in her letters, approved of them. Between 1915 and 1916, Russia churned through prime ministers and ministers at a dizzying rate, and the public was convinced a drunken Siberian peasant was picking them. Was every rumor true? No. His power got exaggerated into legend. But in politics, here's the brutal truth. The perception of power is power. Meanwhile, Russian soldiers were dying by the hundreds of thousands. Bread lines grew, and the empire needed someone to blame. A peasant who partied while boys died at the front, with mysterious control over the German-born empress. He wasn't just a scandal anymore. He was a symbol of everything rotten in Russia. And symbols like that don't get fired. They get removed. December 1916. Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the richest men in Russia, lures Rasputin to his palace with the promise of meeting his beautiful wife. Waiting in the basement, cakes and wine allegedly laced with cyanide, and a group of conspirators convinced they're about to save the empire. You know the legend from the intro. The poison fails, the bullets fail, he's finally drowned in the icy Neva. It's one of history's greatest horror stories. Here's the twist, though. Most of it is probably Yusupov's marketing. The autopsy suggests something much simpler. Rasputin was shot, and a bullet to the head killed him, likely before he ever hit the water. No supernatural resistance required. So why the legend? Because Yusupov needed it. Think about it. We murdered an unarmed dinner guest is a crime. We destroyed an unkillable demon is a heroic epic. Even in death, Rasputin's story was being written by people who needed him to be larger than life. And the darkest punchline? Killing Rasputin saved nothing. 10 weeks later, revolution swept Russia. Within 2 years, Nicholas, Alexandra, and Alexei, the boy Rasputin saved, were all executed. The empire Rasputin had climbed didn't just lose its peasant puppet master, it ceased to exist. So, inside Rasputin's mind, what do we actually find? Not a sorcerer, not a demon, something arguably scarier, a man with an almost supernatural read on what desperate people need to believe, and zero hesitation about becoming it. He found an empress terrified for her son and became her miracle. He found an empire starving for certainty and became its prophet. Rasputin didn't seize power. Power was handed to him by fear. And in my experience digging through history for this channel, that pattern never really went away. It just changed clothes. If this trip inside Rasputin's mind messed with your head a little, good. That's the point of this channel. Do me a favor, hit that like button, because it genuinely tells YouTube that history like this deserves more eyeballs. Subscribe and ring the bell if you want more deep dives into the strangest minds history ever produced. And here's a question for the comments. Was Rasputin a con man who knew exactly what he was doing, or did he actually believe his own legend? I read every comment, and honestly, I still go back and forth on this one myself. Next time on Minds of History, we're getting inside the head of someone who makes Rasputin look well-adjusted. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.